Hello everyone and welcome back to another BOOKMAS video. Today's video is going to be a little more on the negative side than I usually like to film, as we'll be talking about the books that I found to be the most disappointing this year. So overall, 2024 was actually a great reading year. For the most part, I read books that I loved, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that if I wasn't enjoying a book, I just DNF'd it. And I will mention the 13 books that I DNF'd this year, and I'm not going to go into all of the books as to like what they're about, but some of you may enjoy them, but they're just not the books for me. So I DNF'd them. There are 13, and then I have 9 books that I would consider to be disappointments. They're not books that I actively disliked. Like I really disliked these books. They were just disappointing for various reasons, and I'll discuss a little bit why they were disappointing. And there are actually only 3 books that I actually disliked. So all in all, it was a great reading year, and I'm also really excited for the video that's coming out after this one because we'll be talking about all the great reads of 2024. And there are a lot, spoiler alert. I will say a lot of these books, I remember almost nothing about them. I may have to reference Goodreads for some of these, but we'll quickly go over the 13 DNFs. So these are not in any particular order, but we have My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brodi, Asthon, and Jodi Meadows. And on Goodreads, it says that I DNF'd this on page 80. It was quirky and funny, but the YA tone was too much for me, so it wasn't for me. So that is My Lady Jane. I DNF'd Pride and Premeditation by Tirzah Price. And I said that a couple of chapters in, I wasn't a fan of the way that Jane Austen's characters were portrayed and didn't like the YA tone as well. I also DNF'd Amari and the Night Brothers by B.B. Alston, and I just wasn't enjoying it. It's not the kind of fantasy that I like, especially because it's middle grade, so that one was not for me. Then we have The Warm Hand of Ghosts by Katherine Arden. And on Goodreads, I said that I tried a chapter, ended up reading 5 just to see and like get a feel for the book and see if it was for me, and I did not like the writing at all. Then we have The Dress Diary of Mrs. Anne Sykes, and this is nonfiction, and I was just not interested at all. And I do struggle with nonfiction. If it's not something or like a topic that I'm really passionate about, I definitely struggle. So that was not for me. I also DNF'd Marilla of Green Gables by Sarah McCoy, and I know a lot of people don't love it as much as I was hoping to, but also not for me. I also DNF'd A Lady's Guide to Marvels and Misadventure by Angela Bell, and this was back in March, so I don't really remember why, but this is what I said on Goodreads. The premise of this got my attention as it's inspired by Around the World in 80 Days, and some of the characters' names are inspired by the Nutcracker, 2 of my favorite stories. While I think the writing is great and there's been a lot of witty humor, I found Clara to be insufferable. I also don't really like the steampunk elements. I do enjoy enemies to lovers if there's a good reason for it, and if that reason is realistic, and both parties show some maturity at the very least. Unfortunately, the way this trope was portrayed in the first several chapters I read was irksome. I think the book is well written and will definitely suit many readers' tastes. Clara's mother, Mrs. Stanton, has some hilarious things to say and adds something special to the story, but all in all, it's not for me. Another one I DNF'd is The Prophet Calls by Melanie Sumrow, and I'm just not really into cult books, and this one is all about cults. Then The Woman from Lydia by Angela Hunt. Angela Hunt is very much a hit or miss author for me, and sometimes her writing is just not the greatest, to be completely honest, and I was not getting into this book at all. Then we have White River Red by Becky, Marietta, and it looks like I said there was nothing wrong with the book, but I wasn't feeling connected to the story and wasn't engaged, and the characters did not interest me. And then The Moonlight School by Suzanne Woods Fisher. I remember just feeling like the story is going to be very predictable, a very cookie cutter Christian fiction type of story, and I was not interested in the characters at all. This one I did tag as a DNF, not a temporary DNF, but now that I'm thinking about it, this one is actually one I do want to try again, and that is The Dragonfly Pool by Eva Ibbotson. I truly do feel this one is a case of right book, wrong time, and with being a mood reader and everything, and just knowing some people that have read it and loved it, I do want to give it a try again at some point. And the very last DNF is Murder at an Irish Christmas, and I did talk about that in my mid-month wrap-up, so that is the 13th DNF. So I don't think I can count. I said there are 9 books on my disappointments list. There are actually 12, so a few more than I initially said, but still not too bad considering all the books I read this year. But the first book here is The Tale of Cuckoo Brow Wood by Susan Wittig Albert, and this is part of the Beatrix Potter like cozy mystery series. It's very slow and cottagecore type of series, and I really enjoyed the first 2 books, but this one I just found to be really odd and eccentric as compared to the first 2 books. It didn't feel I don't know, it didn't have the same feel. And I had heard that later on in the series, there's, I don't know if it's a dragon or something like that. It's just that the series gets a lot more weird. Obviously, there are talking animals. It's Beatrix Potter. There will be talking animals. And with that, like, I expect that kind of, it's not realistic. But this one was just weird, and I didn't like it nearly as much as the first 2 books, so definitely a disappointment. Not a terrible book, though. It still feels very cottagecore. I hate being negative about books, but I'm glad there aren't a whole lot of them. I'm not going to go into the further chronicles of Avonlea. I did talk about that in my mid-month wrap-up, and why I was disappointed with it. The first few short stories in it were great, and then it just kind of went downhill, so Further Chronicles of Avonlea I found to be disappointing, even though there were definitely some highlights within the short story collection. Bespoke is a short story by Amanda Dykes, and Amanda Dykes is a favorite Christian fiction author. She's incredible, her writing is incredible, and this one was like a 3-star read. So even though I didn't dislike it, I was just disappointed because it wasn't what I was hoping for out of Amanda Dykes. And I think it's also because it's a short story. I'm not huge on short stories, and it takes a really, really good one to get a 5-star from me. So just compared to her full-length novels, I found it a little disappointing. Same idea with The 11th Metal by Brandon Sanderson. I love the Mistborn series so much. The first 3 books I adored. And this one's just a short story about Kelsier, and I was just not interested. I was quite bored, and probably because it's a short story as well, it just didn't have enough to really capture my interest as opposed to a full-length novel. Another book I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up is Spectacular by Stephanie Garber. The story, even though the book itself is gorgeous and the illustrations are beautiful and the audiobook was fantastic, the storyline itself was very odd, and I was definitely disappointed because I was hoping for something a lot more cozy and festive. And while it was cute and cozy in a way, it was just so weird. So a little bit disappointing. I was really hoping to love The Doctor's Wife by Mary Elizabeth Braddon because I adored her book, Lady Audley's Secret. And this one is middle of the road for me. I did not hate it at all. I actually enjoyed parts of it and didn't hate the reading experience. I read it for Victober. It was the group read. But just because of how much I loved Lady Audley's Secret and I love the sensation novel, this one did disappoint a little bit. The main character really got on my nerves, and the storyline itself just isn't my kind of story. So for that, it was a bit of a disappointment. Not a terrible book, though. Then we have The Life of Charlotte Bronte by Elizabeth Gaskell. Elizabeth Gaskell is my favorite female Victorian writer, and I adore every word that she writes. I love her books so much. But this one being nonfiction and a biography, it just wasn't the same. I was disappointed. I think I expected too much, and just the way that this biography is organized is not how I like biographies to be organized. So for me and my tastes, it's not the absolute best thing ever, and I didn't even give it a rating. I wasn't sure kind of what to rate it. There were parts of it that really, really intrigued me, and I definitely want to learn more about the Bronte family. But as a biography, I found it disappointing. I also read The Princess Search by Melanie Sellier, and I'm not sure what number this is in the Four Kingdoms series, but I've really enjoyed these books. They're really, really lighthearted, fun fairy tale retellings, and this one, I think I was just reading it at the wrong time. I should not have pushed through it. It's one of those books where I started it and then I was not in the mood at all for fairy tale retelling, but I pushed through and ended up not enjoying it, probably because of that. But I do enjoy Melanie Sellier's fairy tale retellings. They're very, very lighthearted and a little bit cheesy, but fun when I'm in the mood, but not when I'm not in the mood. So bad timing with this one. Same idea with Mansfield Park. I am absolutely devastated that a Jane Austen book is on my disappointments list. This experience, reading this book for Jane Austen July, really, really taught me a lesson. If I'm in the mood for something gritty, and maybe a little darker, the opposite of cozy, and a book that is not all about the cozy domestic details, I need to read a book like that and not read Jane Austen. As much as I adore Jane Austen, I adore her. I love her writing. I love her books. It was the right book and the wrong time, and I'm so sad because I pushed through and I so regret it. I am going to need to give myself probably a couple years until I try reading this again, just because I did not enjoy the reading experience, and it's not because it's a bad book at all. I love listening to other people talk about this book. I love listening to people gush about this book, and I know that if it's the right time, I will have a similar experience. I'm hopeful. So sad about this one, but that's Mansfield Park. And now we move on to Charles Dickens, who I have a love-hate relationship with. A few of his books I really loved, and a few of them I don't care for at all. Unfortunately, and this one is a favorite for many people, but Bleak House was not the book for me. I was in the mood for something like this, but I just did not enjoy the story. I'm not a very analytical reader, and I can understand that many people find a lot of really interesting things in this book and can garner a lot that I just didn't, and I'm sad about that. I purposefully took my time with this one so that I wouldn't feel overwhelmed, and I still felt overwhelmed. I enjoyed every single chapter with Ada and Mr. Jarndyce and Esther. I loved those characters, but this book was way too long for me, and there were plot elements that just were thrown in there, and I still don't understand why, even after finishing the book. A lot of the times with Dickens, you finish the book and you're like, wow, I see how everything was purposeful and came together so nicely. That's how I felt with Dombey and Son. I adored that book. This one, on the other hand, I could not enjoy it, so I'm really, really sad about it. Another disappointment was The Murder at Mallowin Hall by, I think it's Colleen Cambridge. It's the first book in the Phillida Bright mystery series, and it's a series where it's set in Agatha Christie's house. I enjoyed that Agatha Christie was a side character, and her housekeeper, Phillida Bright, is kind of an amateur sleuth. And while I enjoyed the first little bit of this book, I was pretty disappointed with where the story went, where the mystery went in particular. Like, it was fine. It was nothing special to me, and I don't think I'll continue the series. And then I was also a little disappointed with Yours Cheerfully by A.J. Pierce. This is the second book in the Dear Mrs. Bird, I think it's a trilogy, but Dear Mrs. Bird I also read and really, really loved, but this one was pretty much a letdown compared to Dear Mrs. Bird. I loved Dear Mrs. Bird, I gave it 5 stars, but Yours Cheerfully I just was not interested in. It was more about our main character, I think her name is Emmy, her career, and the way that I wanted her story to go is not the way it went, so it was just a bit disappointing to me. But to end off the video, we'll just quickly go over the 3 books that I truly did dislike. They are really, really disappointing to me. So first up is Five Little Pigs by Agatha Christie. This one started off really strong. It has a really interesting premise with a murder that occurs, and it's linked to the Five Little Pigs nursery rhyme, but it was just way, way too long for the story that Agatha Christie was writing. And I don't know what it is with Agatha Christie lately. I'm reading a lot of mediocre books by her. I haven't read a lot that are 5-star, incredible mysteries. I feel like I've read all of her really good ones, and now I'm just going through her not so amazing ones, and I'm kind of sad about that, but this one I really did not like. I couldn't care by the end where the story went. It was almost 300 pages as well, which I don't care how long a book is, but for a lot of Agatha Christie's mysteries, they don't need to be long with the story she's telling, so I did not enjoy my time with this one at all. And then we have The Night Raven by Johan Rundberg, and this one was translated, I think, from Swedish. It's the first book in a middle grade mystery series called The Moonwind Mysteries. I think I read this back in January, and it started pretty strong. The atmosphere was great. It was very, very tense and gloomy and perfect to read in the wintertime. But it soon became really, really dark for me, especially with it being middle grade. We have basically a 12-year-old girl partnering up with a police officer to investigate a serial killer on the loose. And I believe they actually were hunting for the serial killer too. It didn't make any sense to me why a police officer would take on a 12-year-old and do that, but it was quite gruesome and morbid for a middle grade and just was very disappointing. I did not enjoy it. And last but not least, and I would say this is probably my most disappointing read of the year, and that is Miss Eliza's English Kitchen by Annabelle Abbs. Oh boy, this one I was actually quite frustrated with, and generally, like I've said before, I'll just DNF a book if I'm not feeling it. If I'm frustrated, whatever, but I pushed through this one, and I wish I didn't. I wish I DNF'd it. It promised to be a very cozy, food-filled book all about the culinary world in the early Victorian era, and it was supposed to be a sweet story about friendship, and it really, really went downhill. It was too sexual, and there was just this like gross feeling about it, and the friendship didn't make any sense between our 2 main characters, Anne and Eliza, and it was weird, and I did not enjoy it, and I'm so sorry if it's a book you loved, but I so disliked it. Okay, but that is it for the negativity. The next video will be a lot more positive. I don't like being negative about books, but those are the books that I was very disappointed by in 2024. I'm still really happy with how this year went. It was not a terrible year in terms of negative reads. So that's it for this video, friends, and I'll see you in my next BOOKMAS video where we will be talking about the great reads of 2024. I'll see you in that video. Bye.